Good morning. I'm Brian Curtis.
And I'm Doug Krisner. Here are the stories we're following today.
U.S. President Joe Biden is on his way back from Israel, where he stood shoulder to shoulder with the Israeli people. Let's get to Ed Baxter in San Francisco, who has all the latest. Ed?
Yeah, Brian, Biden says he understands concern about the safety of civilians caught between Israel and Hamas, but that Hamas continues to act out. He says regarding the explosions at the hospital and the Gaza.
Based on the information we've seen to date, it appears the result of an errant rocket fired by a terrorist group in Gaza.
And back on Air Force One, Biden met with reporters and says there is a movement on getting aid to Gaza.
The truth is that if they have an opportunity to relieve the suffering of people who have nowhere to go, they're going to be, it's what they should do.
And the president is saying that Egypt is agreeing now to allow up to 20 trucks a day for Gaza aid, but says the main crossing may not be open until Friday. Meanwhile, voices from around the globe. Palestinian ambassador to the UN, Riyad Mansour, says that President Biden has the power to stop the bloodshed now.
President Biden is a powerful leader. If he tells Israel enough is enough and you have to stop the fighting immediately, and it'll allow for helping the Palestinian people in Gaza, then it is possible to begin the journey of maybe opening a possibility for a political horizon.
Now, Israel's former Prime Minister, Naftali Bennett, says there needs to be clarity about what actually is going on there.
Say that Israel is responsible. I think you have an issue of moral clarity between good and bad. Israel is fighting a defensive war.
And UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres is focused on the suffering now on the Gaza Strip.
I call for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire to provide sufficient time and space to help realize my two appeals and to ease the epic human suffering we are witnessing.
And the UK says Prime Minister Rishi Sunak plans to go to Israel this week. And we have word that Israel Defense Force says it is attacking Hezbollah targets in Lebanon. No new House Speaker. Nominee Jim Jordan says he will stay in the race despite another snub, which was even worse than yesterday's vote.
I already proven I can get from the most conservative members of the conference to the more moderate members of the conference. So got a whole cross-section of the conference. It's important that we get the last few.
But Bloomberg's Kayleigh Lyons reports the math just is not good.
22 Republican members of this conference voted for someone other than Jim Jordan today. It was only 20 yesterday. And as you point out, the way the math worked out is he did flip 2 no's from yesterday into yeses today, or votes for him today. But 4 others turned and voted against him. So the net was 2 greater in number that didn't vote for him today. But to your question about what happens next, nothing's going to happen for a little while. There's no vote called until at least noon tomorrow.
Yeah, now, Mike Lawler was one of the 22 Republicans to vote against Jordan. He says until the core issue of addressing the 8 far-right members of the caucus voted against Kevin McCarthy, Jordan will not win. As a matter of fact, he says he will lose more votes tomorrow. Global News powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in over 120 countries. In San Francisco, I'm Ed Baxter, and this is Bloomberg.
I'm Brian Curtis here in Hong Kong, along with Vonnie Quinn in New York. And let's take a look at the top stories. Well, in the Netflix story, I think the lead actually is the stock is up some 12.5% in after hours. It was a pretty good quarter. Netflix saying that it is raising prices for some customers in the U.S., in the U.K., and also in France after posting its best quarter for subscriber growth in many years. The streaming provider said it added 8.76 million customers in the third quarter, surpassing analyst expectations. Ross Bennis, senior analyst at Insider Intelligence, explains why.
They've been tapped out in the U.S. market and in several other markets like Western Europe in driving new subscribers because they already have such a large user base. But now that they're kicking freeloaders off and making them pay for their own plans, they're getting these bumps each quarter where they're getting the people who used to use their parents' or friends' plans to pay for their own.
That's Ross Bennis. Netflix credited its subscriber increase to a strong programming slate. Netflix is now on track to add more than 20 million customers this year. And again, as mentioned, shares up more than 12% in late trading.
We go to Tesla next. The company is sticking with its full-year production forecast. Tesla is also promising a new Cybertruck to be delivered by November 30th. Now, the optimism here comes despite some disappointing profit and revenue for the last quarter. We got some reaction earlier from Seth Goldstein, equity strategist at Morningstar.
I think we clearly saw that the price cuts have had a major impact on profitability for what is now the fourth straight sequential quarter. And, as Tesla is pursuing the long-term volume growth to generate ancillary revenues over a near-term profit strategy, they might cut prices further in the fourth quarter to spur demand. And if they do so, we would likely see profits take another step down in Q4.
That is Morningstar analyst Seth Goldstein. By the way, Tesla also said it experienced a slowdown in deliveries last quarter after some planned factory downtime slowed production a bit. Those shares right now in late U.S. trading are off nearly 3%. Brian?
Doug, Morgan Stanley shares fell after the firm reported a drop in third quarter profit and slower growth at its wealth management unit. The bank's net interest income of $2 billion was the lowest in more than 2 years. And that came as wealthy clients sought out higher yields on their deposits. Despite this, CEO James Gorman said he expects M&A activity to pick up significantly going forward.
We are seeing increasing evidence of M&A and underwriting calendars that are building. And while we expect momentum to continue this year, given the fourth quarter has some seasonal considerations, we expect most of the activity to materialize in 2024. The minute you see the Fed indicate they've stopped raising rates, the M&A and underwriting calendar will explode.
CEO James Gorman. Morgan Stanley shares closed down 6.7% in New York.
Well, now to the Dutch company ASML, the critically important maker of semiconductor equipment. ASML saying that orders plunged in the third quarter by 42%, given a slump in the semiconductor industry. We have more from Bloomberg's Bonnie Au in Hong Kong.
Bookings at the Dutch chip equipment maker fell to $2.8 billion in the third quarter. The fall was almost double estimates. It comes as the semiconductor industry experiences a slowdown due to inflation and recession fears. ASML is increasingly reliant on revenue from China. China accounted for 46% of ASML's shares in the third quarter, compared to 24% in the previous period. ASML did see a jump in its China business this year as chipmakers front-run U.S. restrictions. But over the long term, ASML says the U.S. measures will hit sales in China. In Hong Kong, I'm Bonnie Au, Bloomberg Radio.
ASML's biggest customer is TSMC, and later the company is expected to report a sharp decline in profit for the third quarter. Bloomberg calculations showing that TSMC sales could fall 11%. Brian?
Well, Vladimir Putin has endorsed Xi Jinping's vision of the Belt and Road Initiative. What is that? The Chinese president sees Belt and Road as a sweeping alternative to the U.S.-led world order. Bloomberg's Joanne Wong has the story from Hong Kong.
Putin praised the Belt and Road Initiative. He said it's in sync with Russia's goal of a world of interconnected infrastructure. He envisions what he calls freedom of trade, investment, and labor. At the Belt and Road Forum, Xi also criticized unilateral sanctions and geopolitical rivalry. Although he didn't identify any country, the remarks were clear references to U.S. policy toward China in recent years. Xi also sees a breakthrough coming in a Sino-Russian gas pipeline that runs through Mongolia. In Hong Kong, I'm Joanne Wong, Bloomberg Radio.
Brian Curtis and Vonnie Quinn. Many thanks to Doug Krisner. Let's get to our guest. It's Jody Schneider, political news director for Bloomberg TV and Radio. Jody, President Biden is promising $100 million of aid to Gaza residents at the same time that he's backing Israel in its bid to crush Hamas. So that kind of creates a natural tension between ordinary residents in Gaza and Hamas fighters, perhaps by design. But I'm curious how you think that plays out on the ground.
Yeah, so we did see, President Biden make this trip 7.5 hours to Israel. He repeated what he's been saying since that October 7th attack, that the U.S. stands steadfastly by Israel and will give Israel what it needs. But by saying so on the ground, it had, an important impact. being there. Israel's leaders really wanted him to come, and so he did. But in terms of being able to give aid to Gaza residents and be able to give them help immediately, it's a lot less clear what he can do. For instance, he got an assurance from Egypt that they would bring some truckloads of supplies, but given the looming humanitarian crisis there, it's unclear how much that will do. And also, in terms of any promises of aid, we have a House of Representatives in the United States that's not functioning. They're trying to get a speaker, and they're continuing to fail. So it's going to be a while before aid is even passed, either for the residents of Gaza or an aid package, a broader aid package to Israel, which will have Ukraine money in it, that's said to be as much as $100 billion that the White House wants to see.
Jody, did the Biden trip change the trajectory of any potential ground incursion or any other kinds of plans that Israel might be making?
I think so, Ani. I think it's really more that it was a symbolic kind of trip, meeting with Israel's leaders, meeting with the families there of some of the victims of the attack and those who had family members who were hostages or believed to be hostages. It really was much more symbolic. In terms of meeting, he had hoped to meet with some Arab leaders there, but his trip, he really was getting on the plane on Air Force One just as that the explosion occurred at the hospital in Gaza, and the trading of information about who was responsible. He came down on the side of Israel when he was there. So it's in terms of kind of trying to change the trajectory, or certainly the message about whether there should be a widening, or trying to stop it from being a widening conflict, and trying to calm some of those concerns. I'm not so sure he was that successful, partly because he didn't get to meet with Arab leaders during his trip.
The president will give a primetime speech tomorrow night from Washington once he's back. A lot to talk about. What do you think some of the key messages will be?
Yeah, well, I think among them will certainly be he will continue to double down on support for Israel, kind of use the emotion, as he's done very effectively, siding with the families who have who have lost loved ones. He will make it clear that this is, an existential threat to Israel's future, and he won't let that happen. I think we'll hear that again and again and again in all these speeches from the president. I think we will also hear, and he is increasingly adding another message here, which is support and concern about what he's calling ordinary citizens in Gaza, those who are not affiliated with Hamas, who just want to live their lives. And I think he will be making the case that they deserve better than they're getting, and that they want there to be humanitarian aid to them. Again, how you do that and how you get people out of there now is a very tricky question. And the third thing will be, don't let this widen, and a message directed to Iran.
Yeah, just a quick follow. That's kind of the thrust of my first question, which was, how do you drive a wedge between ordinary residents and Hamas fighters? Is it possible? And is that really what they're trying to achieve?
Yeah, I don't know really how you do that, and I'm not sure the administration knows. And the Israelis, when they go in, it will be very difficult to determine, which is a Hamas hideout, and which is, a Hamas-dominated, area, and which is not. So it's going to be a very, very tricky situation, and I think the president realizes that, but he wants that message to be now directed, to a worldwide audience, obviously, that we support Israel, but we don't want to see, harm come to so-called ordinary citizens. But how that happens is a whole nother matter.
Jody, to what extent will Arab leaders be part of the conversation now?
Yeah, I think the president and the Biden administration wants very much to be reaching out. I mean, Tony Blinken, the Secretary of State, crisscrossed the region for several days, going to Saudi Arabia, going to Qatar, really trying to talk to everybody. And I think they want as many people on their side as they can get in terms of saying, let us not, widen this conflict. There's no reason for Iran to get involved. We don't want to see, Hezbollah in the north get involved. But again, this becomes more complicated when you have things like that blast at that hospital, and of course the trading of blame there. That makes it much more complicated.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Asia, your morning brief on the stories making news from Hong Kong to Singapore and Wall Street.
Look for us on your podcast feed every day on Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcast.
You can also listen live each day on Bloomberg 1130 in New York, Bloomberg 99.1 in Washington, Bloomberg 106.1 in Boston, and Bloomberg 960 in San Francisco.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
Plus, listen coast to coast on the Bloomberg Business app, Sirius XM Channel 119, the iHeartRadio app, and on Bloomberg.com. I'm Brian Curtis.
And I'm Doug Krisner. Join us again tomorrow for all the news you need to start your day right here on Bloomberg Daybreak Asia.